Good evening, traveler through time, and welcome to History in Slippers. Before we begin, I'd love to know where this finds you tonight. Are you stretched out in bed, letting the day slowly slip away? On a late drive with the road humming beneath you? Maybe cooking, cleaning, or just stealing a quiet moment for yourself. Wherever you are, under blankets, on a train, in the kitchen with something sizzling, or walking with headphones on, you're welcome here. If you'd like, share it in the comments. It's always a joy to see the little rituals in far-flung places that bring us together around these stories. And if you enjoy this way of slowing down with history, a like or subscribe helps more curious minds find their way here. This channel is for quiet listeners, for those who want real stories, softly told without the rush or the noise. Now, settle in. The shadows deepen, the air grows heavy, and far back in time, more than 300 million years ago, a strange new world is waiting. Step with me back into a world both familiar and utterly alien. The Carboniferous was an age of endless green, when towering forests stretched across entire continents and swamps bred life on a scale the Earth had never seen before. Here, the air was thicker, richer in oxygen than today, and that simple difference gave rise to giants, dragonflies with wings as wide as hawks, millipedes the length of crocodiles, and amphibians that prowled like early rulers of the land. The continents were clustered near the equator, wrapped in a hot, humid climate that turned vast regions into endless swamp forests. The air itself was different. Oxygen levels were nearly twice as high as today, making the world feel heavy and alive. This chemical change shaped everything. Insects and arthropods grew to astonishing sizes. Dragonflies with half-meter wingspans hunted through the skies, while millipedes over 2 meters long crawled across the forest floor. The land was dominated by towering plants, unlike any we know today. Giant club mosses, tree ferns, and horsetails that rose as high as modern buildings. Their shallow roots anchored them in waterlogged soils, and when they died, they toppled into the swamps. Over millions of years, these fallen forests were pressed and buried, forming the coal seams that humans would one day dig up to fuel their own industrial age. But life here was not just plants and insects. Amphibians flourished in the wetlands, ranging from small lizard-like forms to bulky predators that patrolled the rivers. Reptiles, newly evolved, were just beginning to take their first steps onto drier ground, a quiet revolution that would eventually change the face of life forever. The Carboniferous was a world in transition, lush, oxygen-rich, teeming with giants, a green engine that not only shaped ecosystems of its time, but also laid down the foundations of energy reserves that would echo into human history. Step into the Carboniferous, and you'd find yourself surrounded by forests unlike anything alive today. These weren't familiar oaks, pines, or maples. Instead, entire landscapes were dominated by strange, towering plants that blurred the line between tree and fern. The giants of the time were the lycopsids, relatives of today's tiny club mosses. But while modern club mosses barely reach a few centimeters, their ancient cousins like Lepidodendron and Sigillaria soared more than 30 meters high, with trunks as wide as a modern house doorway. Their bark was patterned with distinctive diamond-shaped scars, each marking where a leaf once grew. Unlike modern wood, their trunks were made of a softer, spongy tissue, which allowed rapid growth but left them weaker against storms. Around them stretched thickets of calamites, horsetails that today grow waist-high, but back then rose as tall as a modern tree, forming dense stands along the swamp margins. Tree ferns added to this primeval skyline, their massive fronds unfurling like green umbrellas. Together, these plants created closed, humid canopies where sunlight filtered down in scattered beams, feeding a floor tangled with roots, spores, and primitive undergrowth. The ground itself was unstable. a patchwork of waterlogged swamps and mud, where toppled trunks often stayed where they fell. Because the air was rich in oxygen, but the swampy soils were low in oxygen, these massive plants didn't rot away quickly. Instead, they piled up in thick layers of peat. Over millions of years, under heat and pressure, those layers compressed into seams of coal, vast reserves of energy that humans would rediscover in the Industrial Revolution, long after these forests vanished. The atmosphere of the Carboniferous was unique too. Oxygen levels reached up to 35, compared to just 21 today. That made the air more flammable, but also supercharged the metabolism of insects and amphibians. Walking through these forests, you would hear the constant chorus of life. Amphibians croaking in shallow pools, giant dragonflies buzzing with wings the size of hawks, and the occasional splash of an early reptile slipping into the undergrowth. It was an alien world, humid, loud, and alive with forms that seem familiar in name, but utterly strange in shape. And yet, these forests weren't just the backdrop of the Carboniferous, they were its engine. They captured sunlight, locked away carbon, and laid the foundations for future ages of both life and industry. If there was one creature that defined the skies of the Carboniferous, it was Meganeura, the giant dragonfly of prehistory. With wingspans stretching up to 70 centimeters, wider than a raven's, Meganeura was not just an insect. It was a predator that dominated the air like an eagle does today. Picture the swampy forests 300 million years ago. The air is thick and humid, buzzing with life. Suddenly, a shadow passes overhead. Not a bird. They wouldn't appear for another 150 million years, but an insect with wings that beat in deep, powerful strokes. Meganeura swoops silently, its enormous compound eyes scanning every movement below. Then, in a blur, it seizes its prey. A smaller insect, crushed instantly in its spiny legs and carried off to be devoured. Unlike modern dragonflies, which already seem fearsome in their hunting efficiency, Meganeura was a true apex predator of its ecosystem. With no birds, bats, or flying reptiles around yet, it ruled the skies uncontested. Other insects had little defense. Swarms of mayflies or giant cockroaches could vanish under the relentless hunting pressure of these massive flyers. But how could an insect get so large? The secret lies in the Carboniferous atmosphere. Oxygen levels were around 30-35, far higher than today's 21. Insects breathe through tiny tubes called tracheae, which rely on diffusion rather than lungs. In today's thinner oxygen, there's a hard limit to their size, but in the lush, oxygen-rich world of the Carboniferous, those limits were stretched, allowing Meganeura to expand into the skies as a giant of its kind. Its body was perfectly built for aerial supremacy. Two sets of long, veined wings moved independently, giving it incredible maneuverability. Its enormous eyes, each a mosaic of thousands of lenses, gave it a near panoramic view. Its jaws were strong enough to shear through the exoskeletons of other insects. Everything about Meganeura screamed efficiency, speed, and dominance. Imagine the soundscape of that time, the deep thrum of enormous wings echoing across the swamp, the sudden silence as smaller insects scattered, sensing their hunter. To walk through this world, if a human could, would mean constantly looking upward, wary of creatures large enough to mistake you for prey. Fossil evidence of Meganeura is rare but spectacular. Preserved impressions of wings reveal the fine latticework of veins, each line a detail in the architecture of flight. These fossils remind us that long before birds or pterosaurs ever flapped through the skies, insects were already experimenting with flight on a grand scale. But Meganeura's reign was not eternal. As oxygen levels dropped in the late Carboniferous and Permian periods, giant insects dwindled. Their bodies could no longer sustain such size in thinner air, and evolutionary limits force them back into smaller forms. Today's dragonflies are their closest living relatives, smaller, yes, but still astonishing hunters, carrying echoes of their giant ancestors. In the story of life, Meganeura stands as a reminder of how strange and alien Earth once was. A time when insects ruled the air, and wings the size of a hawk's belonged not to birds, but to the buzzing lords of the Carboniferous skies. If Meganeura ruled the skies, then Arthropleura was the undisputed monarch of the forest floor. Imagine a creature that looked like a centipede or millipede, but stretched nearly 3 meters long and half a meter wide, longer than a human and broad enough to cover a child's bed. This was not a monster from a nightmare, but a real animal that once crawled across the coal swamps of the Carboniferous, leaving deep impressions in the mud that fossilized into records we can still see today. Walking through a Carboniferous forest, you would not hear its roar. Arthropleura was silent. Instead, you might catch the rhythmic scraping sound of dozens of legs moving in waves, lifting and falling in perfect coordination. Its armored plates, called tergites, overlapped like the tiles of a roof, forming a living tank that could withstand pressure and protect it from predators. Sunlight filtering through giant ferns would glint off the glossy surface of its carapace, a black-green sheen like polished stone. The scale alone is almost hard to grasp. The largest modern millipedes rarely exceed 30 centimeters, but Arthropleura reached up to 5 meters long. Some reconstructions even suggest close to 3 meters. That means if one passed you by, it would stretch from your feet to well above your head. In its time, no vertebrate on land matched its size. It was the largest known land invertebrate to ever exist. What did such a creature eat? Surprisingly, most evidence suggests that Arthropleura was herbivorous, despite its terrifying appearance. Its jaws lacked the sharp cutting structures we see in predators. Instead, it likely fed on the abundant vegetation of the swamps, rotting wood, fallen leaves, ferns, and seedless plants that carpeted the Carboniferous landscape. In an environment rich with decaying organic matter, Arthropleura would have had more than enough food to fuel its enormous body. Still, paleontologists leave the door open to the possibility that it was opportunistic, maybe snapping up soft-bodied insects or small amphibians when the chance arose. In an ecosystem where competition was fierce, versatility was survival. How could such a colossal arthropod exist? The same factor that allowed Meganeura to take to the skies: oxygen. During the Carboniferous, atmospheric oxygen levels were at least 35, far higher than the 21 we breathe today. Insects and arthropods breathe not through lungs but through tracheal tubes that rely on diffusion. In today's air, diffusion sets a hard upper limit on size, but in that oxygen-rich world, Arthropleura's body could sustain a size no millipede today could dream of. Fossil tracks, called ichnofossils, give us vivid glimpses of this titan in motion. In Nova Scotia, scientists discovered trails of parallel grooves stretching across ancient mudstone, each mark a footprint from one of its many legs. These tracks show that Arthropleura moved with surprising speed and agility for its size, not a sluggish crawler, but a confident traveler of the forest floor. Now, imagine the sensory experience of encountering one. As you step into a clearing, the ground trembles softly. A shadow slides over the damp soil, and from beneath a fallen tree emerges the ridged back of Arthropleura. Dozens of legs ripple in sequence, propelling its immense body forward. Its antennae sway through the air, testing scents, detecting vibrations. It does not notice you, or perhaps it does, but considers you irrelevant, and continues on its slow march, an ancient colossus passing by like a living log come to life. It's worth noting, despite its fearsome appearance, Arthropleura likely had few natural enemies. No large vertebrate predators existed yet to challenge it. Amphibians of the time were small compared to this armored giant. Its sheer size was its best defense, and its armored plates made it an even less appealing target. For tens of millions of years, it lived as an untouchable sovereign of the undergrowth. But like so many giants of the Carboniferous, its reign was not eternal. As the climate shifted into the Permian period, oxygen levels declined. The lush swamps began to dry, forests gave way to drier biomes, and the ecological niche that sustained Arthropleura began to vanish. Without the high oxygen to fuel its massive body and the dense vegetation to feed it, the giant millipede lineage shrank and eventually disappeared. The descendants we see today are far smaller, mere echoes of the colossal bodies that once ruled the primeval forest floor. Yet, Arthropleura remains one of the most extraordinary reminders of what Earth's ecosystems were capable of producing under different conditions. It shows us that life is not fixed, that it stretches and bends, limited only by the boundaries of physics, chemistry, and atmosphere. In a sense, these ancient millipedes were experiments probing the upper limits of what an arthropod could be. For us, their fossils are windows into that alien world, a world where the ground was alive with armored waves, where the quiet monarch of the Carboniferous forests crept along, unseen by human eyes, but leaving behind the marks of its passage in stone. While giants like Arthropleura ruled the forest floor and Meganeura patrolled the skies, beneath the dark, murky waters of the Carboniferous swamps lurked a creature that seemed almost designed to unsettle the imagination. Crassigyrinus. Its name means thick tadpole, and at first glance, that's not far from the truth. Imagine a hulking eel-like predator with a massive head, tiny useless limbs, and a mouth crammed with sharp recurved teeth. This was no delicate amphibian hopping along the water's edge. This was an apex ambush predator, built to dominate the flooded forests and rivers more than 300 million years ago. Crassigyrinus was not particularly large compared to Arthropleura or the giant dragonflies. It reached about 2 meters in length, roughly the size of a crocodile. But its design made it one of the most efficient hunters of its time. Its body was long, streamlined, and muscular, perfect for darting through tangled swamps. Its 4 limbs, so small they were practically vestigial, hint that it had fully abandoned life on land. Unlike its amphibian cousins that were still experimenting with crawling onto shorelines, Crassigyrinus was fully committed to the water. Its head, however, was its defining feature. Fossils show a massive skull with huge jaws, nearly 1/3 of its body length. Within those jaws sat rows of sharp backward-curving teeth, perfect for seizing slippery prey like fish and amphibians. Once something was caught, escape was nearly impossible. The jaw mechanics suggest an incredibly powerful bite, capable of crushing through flesh and bone alike. If you imagine standing waist-deep in a Carboniferous swamp, Crassigyrinus is the shadow you'd fear just below the surface, waiting for the ripple of movement to strike. What did it hunt? Likely anything it could overpower. The Carboniferous swamps teemed with prey, primitive bony fish, armored species like Rhizodus, and early tetrapods venturing near the water's edge. With its ambush strategy, Crassigyrinus would have hidden in the thick aquatic vegetation or mud, lunging forward with explosive force when prey swam too close. Its long body gave it the speed of an eel, but its enormous head made the attack devastatingly final. Its appearance in life would have been bizarre, almost alien. Reconstructions show a creature with a thick muscular tail, stubby flipper-like limbs tucked tight against its body, and a disproportionately large skull with bulging eyes set high for watching above the water. Picture a hybrid between a crocodile, a salamander, and a sea monster, and you come close. This strange anatomy makes Crassigyrinus one of the most unique evolutionary experiments of the Carboniferous, an amphibian that had essentially given up on land and gone fully aquatic long before reptiles and mammals began their journeys. But why did it evolve this way? The answer lies in the Carboniferous world itself. The coal swamps were vast networks of slow rivers, stagnant pools, and floodplains choked with vegetation. For many animals, this was a challenging place to move. For Crassigyrinus, however, it was the perfect hunting ground. The water-muffled sound, the dim light hid its silhouette, and the dense plant cover gave it countless ambush spots. Evolution shaped it into a weapon that thrived in these conditions, sleek, powerful, and specialized. Fossil evidence also suggests that Crassigyrinus lived for millions of years with very little change. In evolutionary terms, that's a sign of success. It had found a design that worked, and in the stagnant, oxygen-rich swamps, it remained unchallenged. Few creatures dared compete with it in its niche. Still, its dominance had limits. Unlike fish, it still needed to breathe air, surfacing regularly like a modern crocodile. And as the Carboniferous swamps gave way to the drier climates of the Permian, its specialized adaptations became a disadvantage. The lush, waterlogged environments it depended on shrank, and so too did its chances of survival. By the early Permian, Crassigyrinus vanished, leaving behind only its strange fossils to puzzle paleontologists. Imagine for a moment what it would be like to see one alive. You're walking along the edge of a vast coal swamp. The air is thick and damp. The buzzing of insects fills your ears. At the water's edge, you catch movement, the faint ripple of something beneath the surface. Suddenly, a massive head bursts upward, jaws snapping shut around an unfortunate amphibian. With a violent thrash, the predator pulls its struggling prey back beneath the water, leaving only bubbles and silence behind. This was the reality of the Carboniferous, a world where danger could come not from the skies or the forests, but from the murky depths just a step away. In the great story of prehistoric life, Crassigyrinus represents the strangeness and unpredictability of evolution. While many of its cousins were moving toward land and laying the groundwork for reptiles and mammals, it chose the opposite path, back into the water, refining itself into a master of the swamps. It was a reminder that survival is not about progress toward some future ideal, but about fitting perfectly into the present moment. And in its moment, Crassigyrinus was perfect. If Crassigyrinus was the lurking shadow of the swamps, then Rhizodus was the monster of the open waters. This was no ordinary fish. It was one of the largest freshwater predators the world has ever seen, stretching up to 7 meters in length. Imagine something longer than a great white shark, armed with jaws filled with massive conical teeth, cruising through the slow-moving rivers of the Carboniferous. Rhizodus belonged to the group of lobe-finned fish, distant relatives of the ancestors that would eventually crawl onto land. But unlike those early tetrapods, it never left the water. Instead, it became a streamlined apex hunter, dominating lakes and rivers in much the same way crocodiles and sharks do today. Its body was muscular and torpedo-shaped, with powerful fins that propelled it in short explosive bursts. Its head was its most fearsome weapon. Fossils revealed jaws nearly a meter long, lined with teeth designed to pierce and hold large prey. These weren't delicate needles. They were thick, robust, and capable of crushing bone. A strike from Rhizodus would have been brutal and final, dragging victims into its gaping maw before they had any chance to escape. What did it hunt? Likely anything unlucky enough to share its waters. Smaller fish, amphibians, and even young Arthropleura that strayed too close to the water's edge may have fallen victim. Some paleontologists speculate it could have attacked early tetrapods venturing onto land, lunging upward from the shallows much like a modern crocodile. In a carboniferous world teeming with life, Rhizodus sat at the very top of the food chain. Its sheer size made it almost invulnerable. Few creatures could challenge it. Even formidable predators like Crassigyrinus were dwarfed by Rhizodus. Where one was an ambusher of murky backwaters, the other was the ruler of wide rivers and lakes. Different strategies, same result: dominance. But as mighty as it was, Rhizodus was still a creature of its time. Its massive body required vast amounts of food, and its watery kingdom was tied closely to the lush carboniferous environment. When climates shifted toward the drier landscapes of the Permian, its dominance came to an end. The ecosystems that supported such leviathans began to vanish, and with them, Rhizodus disappeared. Still, its legacy is remarkable. For millions of years, it was the terror of the rivers, a reminder that before dinosaurs, before even reptiles had taken hold, the waters of Earth already harbored giants. Picture yourself on the banks of a carboniferous river. The air is heavy, insects drone in the distance, and the water looks calm. Then, without warning, a massive shape stirs beneath the surface. The reflection breaks, a giant head bursts upward, and an entire animal disappears in one snap of colossal jaws. That was life in the Carboniferous, a world where survival meant never straying too close to the water's edge. Among the strange and remarkable creatures of the Carboniferous, Hibbertopterus stands out as one of the most unusual. If Meganeura ruled the skies and Arthropleura stretched across the forest floor, then Hibbertopterus claimed the shallows, a slow-moving, armored presence in the swamp. It looked like something between a crab and a scorpion, but scaled up to nearly 2 meters in length, heavy, broad, and built like a tank. Hibbertopterus belonged to the Eurypterids, often called sea scorpions. Earlier in Earth's history, Eurypterids were swift hunters of shallow seas, some of them among the largest arthropods to ever live. But by the Carboniferous, their role had shifted. Fish now dominated the open waters, and Hibbertopterus adapted not as a predator, but as a benthic feeder, a creature that sifted through mud and silt for small prey and organic scraps. Its body told the story of this transformation. Gone was the sleek, streamlined form of the old sea scorpions. Instead, Hibbertopterus carried a wide, flattened shell. Its legs were sturdy rather than fast, spreading its weight across soft swamp bottoms. Most distinctive were its shovel-like appendages, designed to rake through sediment and filter out worms, larvae, and detritus. Imagine it slowly dragging itself forward, scooping and sorting, a living dredger turning the swamp floor over for food. Unlike Meganeura or Arthropleura, Hibbertopterus was not built for speed or spectacle. It relied on sheer size and armor. With its heavy exoskeleton and awkward bulk, it was more trouble than it was worth to most predators. Outrunning danger wasn't its strategy. Instead, survival came from being too tough, too heavily armored, and perhaps too unappetizing to attack. Its home was the freshwater swamps and lagoons of Europe, particularly in regions that would one day become Scotland and Germany. Fossil trackways preserve the wide, plodding marks of its limbs pressed into ancient mud, evidence that it lived close to the shoreline as well as in deeper pools. These faint trails tell us something striking. Hibbertopterus wasn't an open-water creature. It hugged the margins, thriving in the murky, oxygen-rich waters of the coal forests. To our eyes, Hibbertopterus might seem almost comical, a lumbering swamp tank, neither elegant nor graceful. Yet its role was crucial. It was one of the Carboniferous' many recyclers, breaking down organic matter, disturbing sediments, and redistributing nutrients across the swamp floor. Without slow feeders like this, the stability of those lush ecosystems, forests of giant ferns, horsetails, and lycopsids might have been far more fragile. Its presence also reminds us of the diversity of life strategies in the Carboniferous. In one world, you had enormous predators like Rhizodus stalking rivers, giant millipedes like Arthropleura roaming on land, dragonfly like Meganeura dominating the skies, and then Hibbertopterus, not fast, not fierce, but perfectly suited to its niche. Its success was not built on power or speed, but on patience, persistence, and adaptation. The sight of Hibbertopterus dragging its armored body through shallow water, claws raking through the silt, is a vivid reminder that the Carboniferous was not only the age of towering plants and giant insects, it was also the age of specialists, creatures that filled narrow roles, strange experiments in survival, each contributing to an ecosystem unlike anything the Earth has seen since. Among the towering trees and endless swamps of the Carboniferous, a tiny creature made history. Just a few inches long, no bigger than a modern lizard, Hylonomus was not impressive in size or appearance. Yet its arrival marked a turning point in evolution, one that would open the door to an entirely new way of life on land. Before Hylonomus, most animals were still bound to water. Amphibians dominated the wetlands, but they carried a burden. Their eggs had to be laid in ponds and streams, their young tied to aquatic nurseries. Even as adults, they rarely ventured far from the moist ground. The land was rich, but it remained closed off to them, a place they could only visit, never fully claim. Hylonomus broke that barrier. What made it different was not its claws or its teeth, but the structure of its eggs. Instead of soft, jelly-like masses that needed water, it produced amniotic eggs, tiny packages with their own protective membranes and fluid. For the first time, life could be laid directly on the forest floor. These eggs carried their own little pond inside, allowing the young to develop in safety, shielded from drying out. This innovation sounds small, but it was revolutionary. It freed reptiles from the swamps and allowed them to spread across drier terrain. Suddenly, the thick carpets of ferns and forest clearings could be home, not just the shadowy banks of rivers. From this evolutionary leap would eventually come dinosaurs, birds, mammals, and us. All of it began with little creatures like Hylonomus scurrying among the roots of ancient trees. Hylonomus itself lived a simple life. It hunted insects, millipedes, and other small arthropods that thrived in the warm, oxygen-rich air of the Carboniferous. Its sharp teeth and quick reflexes made it an agile predator in miniature. To the giant dragonflies or the armored fish of nearby rivers, it was insignificant. But in evolutionary terms, it was a pioneer. Fossils of Hylonomus had been found inside the hollow stumps of extinct trees, preserved like tiny time capsules. Perhaps they used these cavities as shelter, crawling into rotting trunks to hide from larger predators. Or perhaps some were simply unlucky, trapped after entering and never finding a way back out. Whatever the reason, those remains tell us a story, that this unassuming reptile lived in close connection with the swampy forests, weaving itself into the same ecosystems that produced the giant arthropods and amphibians of its age. If you could travel back to the Carboniferous and sit quietly on the damp forest floor, you might hear the faint rustle of leaves as one of these little reptiles darted past. It wouldn't look like much, a small lizard-like creature among giants, but you'd be witnessing the quiet spark of something that would shape the entire course of life on Earth. Hylonomus reminds us that revolutions in nature are not always loud. Sometimes they arrive softly, on tiny feet, carrying eggs the size of a thumbnail. Every age has its enigmas, and for the Carboniferous, few are as strange and elusive as Tullimonstrum, better known as the Tully monster. Discovered in the fossil-rich shale of Illinois, this creature has puzzled scientists for decades. It doesn't resemble a fish or an insect or any familiar category. Instead, it seems like something from a dream or perhaps a nightmare. Tullimonstrum was small, usually no more than a foot long. Its body was soft and segmented with no bones, no shell, nothing that clearly places it in the great family tree of life. At one end stretched a long trunk-like appendage ending in a claw-like jaw lined with small teeth. At the other, a tail fin spread wide, suggesting it swam through the dark waters of Carboniferous estuaries. Most striking of all were its eyes, perched on the ends of a rigid bar, like twin orbs on a stalk, peering in opposite directions. What kind of creature was this? For decades, paleontologists debated. Some argued it was related to mollusks, others thought it might be a worm or even an early vertebrate. The problem is that its body defies easy classification. Unlike insects or fish, it left behind no hard parts, no skeletons to guide us. What we know comes entirely from impressions in stone, shadows of something soft-bodied and alien, preserved against the odds. Yet, despite its strangeness, Tullimonstrum was not rare. In certain fossil beds, thousands of specimens have been uncovered, suggesting it was once a common resident of Carboniferous lagoons and river deltas. Perhaps it fed on small crustaceans, using its proboscis to snatch prey from the mud. Perhaps it drifted in schools, fins flashing in the dim light of shallow waters. Whatever its behavior, it was clearly adapted to its world, even if we struggle to place it in ours. The story of the Tully monster also speaks to the limits of knowledge. Even with modern tools, CT scans, chemical analysis, comparisons with living creatures, its identity remains debated. Was it a distant cousin of lampreys, an odd branch of vertebrates, or something entirely separate, a lineage that has no descendants left alive today? Each study offers clues, but none close the case. In the mystery of Tullimonstrum, we glimpse how vast and varied ancient life really was, and how much of it we may never fully understand. Imagine standing at the edge of a carboniferous swamp, watching the waters ripple under thick mats of ferns and horsetails. In that murky world, Tullimonstrum swam unseen, its eyes scanning, its trunk reaching forward for hidden prey. To us, it looks like a monster. To its time, it was simply another creature, part of the great experiment of life. And that may be the greatest lesson the Tully monster offers, that not all of evolution's creations fit neatly into our categories. Some defy them, reminding us that life is stranger than we expect, and always has been. In the rolling hills of Montana lies a window into the past, a fossil bed known as Bear Gulch. During the Carboniferous, over 320 million years ago, this place was a shallow bay or lagoon, fed by rivers and cut off at times from the open sea. Conditions here were just right to preserve even the most delicate creatures. As a result, Bear Gulch is not simply a graveyard of bones and shells, it is a portrait of a whole community, frozen in stone. What makes Bear Gulch extraordinary is its diversity. More than 150 species have been found here, from fish and arthropods to soft-bodied animals rarely preserved elsewhere. Many of these fossils are so detailed that muscles, stomach contents, and even pigments can sometimes be studied. It is one of the most complete snapshots of Carboniferous marine life we have, and it reveals a world far stranger and richer than we might imagine. Sharks were among the dominant hunters of Bear Gulch, not the massive predators we picture today, but small, diverse experimental forms. Some carried unusual spines and fins, others flattened bodies for gliding along the sea floor. These were early experiments in a lineage that would survive and thrive for hundreds of millions of years. Alongside them swam coelacanths, relatives of the living fossil species still found in deep oceans today. Their lobed fins and slow, deliberate swimming style gave them an air of patience, as if they moved to a rhythm far older than the bay itself. Other fish had bizarre adaptations, forward-facing eyes, strange jaw shapes, or bodies built for hovering in still waters. Each was a unique solution to the puzzle of survival in Bear Gulch's shifting currents. But it wasn't just fish. Crustaceans scuttled along the bottom, leaving trails in the mud. Soft-bodied animals like squids and worms, rarely preserved in other places, are found here in abundance. Even jellyfish left faint impressions, ghostly circles pressed into stone. Together, they show us that Bear Gulch was not a place of giants, but of intricacy, a web of interactions where every niche was filled. Why was Bear Gulch so special? Scientists believe sudden events, perhaps seasonal die-offs or rapid changes in oxygen levels, buried creatures quickly in fine sediment. This rapid burial sealed them away from decay and scavengers, preserving them with remarkable clarity. It is as if time paused in the lagoon, giving us a still frame of life as it was lived, moment by moment. To walk through the fossils of Bear Gulch is to step into an alien aquarium. Schools of fish dart between shadows of coral-like structures. Predators glide in search of prey. At the water's edge, strange arthropods creep through the shallows, and overhead, the surface ripples faintly, carrying the filtered light of a Carboniferous sun. Bear Gulch reminds us that the Carboniferous was not only an age of swamps and giant insects, but also of oceans and bays teeming with variety. Life was experimenting in every direction, producing forms both familiar and utterly unique. Some of these lineages endured, others vanished without a trace, leaving behind only their delicate impressions in Montana's stone. Even now, more than 300 million years later, Bear Gulch speaks softly of a vanished world, not with the roar of dinosaurs or the drama of mass extinction, but with the quiet persistence of detail. In its fossils, we find not just creatures, but the patterns of life itself, fragile, fleeting, and yet somehow eternal. As we conclude our deep exploration of the Carboniferous period, it becomes clear that this era was a truly extraordinary chapter in Earth's history, one marked by vast humid tropical coal forests and ecosystems teeming with uniquely adapted, often gigantic creatures. From the towering lycopods and tree ferns that formed the dense swampy landscapes to the colossal insects and arthropods that dominated the land, the Carboniferous was a world unlike anything we see today. It was a time when atmospheric oxygen levels soared, enabling evolutionary marvels such as Meganeura, the giant griffinfly, and Arthropleura armata, the massive millipede-like myriapod. Aquatic environments were home to early tetrapods like Crassigyrinus, fierce apex predators such as Rhizodus, and enigmatic animals like Tullimonstrum gregarium, whose place in the tree of life still puzzles scientists. The Carboniferous period also witnessed crucial evolutionary milestones, such as the emergence of the first true reptiles exemplified by Hylonomus, which showcased adaptations allowing life to thrive fully on land. However, these lush rainforests and their remarkable inhabitants eventually declined during the Carboniferous Rainforest Collapse, paving the way for drier climates and new ecological dynamics. The fossil record from this time, especially from sites like Bear Gulch, continues to reveal an incredible diversity of life, including bizarre cartilaginous fishes and myriad invertebrates, underscoring the complexity and richness of these ancient ecosystems. reflecting on this bygone world invites us to appreciate not only the vast evolutionary experimentation of the Paleozoic, but also the fragile, ever-changing nature of life on Earth. The Carboniferous stands as a testament to how life can flourish under unique environmental conditions and reminds us of the ongoing quest to uncover the mysteries of our planet's deep past. With each new fossil discovery, we gain invaluable insights into the early chapters of terrestrial and aquatic life, inspiring wonder and curiosity about what other secrets this ancient world might yet reveal. Thank you for joining this journey through the swamps, lakes, and forests of the Carboniferous, where life was both alien and awe-inspiring, forever shaping the world we inhabit today.